Good morning and a very, very warm welcome to you all, both in person, which is exciting that we're here again, and then of course online as well. And a very, very warm welcome to our guest speaker, Dr. Mark Williams. It is such an honor to have you here, coming all the way from England. And we're looking very forward to a 2-hour session. And before we start, I will actually pass it over to Lisa Hashimoto, our program assistant, who will do the land acknowledgement and also the introductions, because Wellness Wednesday really is very much a team approach, and I'm very grateful that you've organized all of this. So here it is to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Soki, for the introduction. And again, a warm welcome to all of you here today. My name is Elisa, and I am one of the program assistant for the BC Brain Wellness Program, and I'll be serving as your MC for today's event. As much as all of you are excited today, I am very excited to be here in person today for our very first hybrid Wellness Wednesday event. We're joined today by Dr. Mark Williams, a very special guest who will be sharing about mindfulness. Through today's session, Dr. Williams will present mindfulness frame by frame, rediscovering calm in a chaotic world. Mindfulness is used by millions of people across the world and has been proven effective at alleviating mental and physical pain, addictions, and depressions, as well as enhancing well-being. In today's talk, Dr. Williams reveals how the latest advances in psychological science, combined with the millennia-old practice of mindfulness, offers new ways forward for those wishing to learn, sustain, and deepen mindfulness to help deal with chaos, stress, and exhaustion of daily life. Before we get started, I would like to first acknowledge that the BC Brain Wellness Program at the Javid Morphasian Center of Brain Health is treated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam peoples. I'm joining you today from Vancouver, the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. As all of you are joining from different places today on Zoom, I encourage us all to also take a moment to reflect and give thanks to the lands where we're privileged to work, learn, and play from. A link will be posted in the chat for those of you on Zoom if you're interested in learning more about the native lands. I would also like to take a moment to thank all of our program donors for supporting the BC Brain Wellness Program. Because of your generosity, we are able to provide these educational events and our online classes. As an entirely donor-funded program, we rely on your generosity to ensure that continuation and development of our program. Thank you for your ongoing support. Okay, and without further ado, I will introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Mark Williams. So Dr. Mark Williams is a professor of clinical psychology in the Department of Psychiatry at University of Oxford. The main focus of his research and clinical work has been to understand how best to prevent serious clinical depression and suicide. With colleagues John Tisdall from Cambridge and Zindal Segal from Toronto, he co-developed mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, also known as MBCT, for prevention of depression. Research has now found that MBCT reliably reduces the rate of future episodes in those who have suffered the most serious and persistent forms of major depression in the past. And it is now recommended as an evidence-based approach in many countries across the world. His books include Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy for Depression, The Mindful Way of Flirt Workbook, and The Mindful Way Through Depression, Feeling Yourself from Chronic Unhappiness. Most recently, he has been working with colleagues to develop an 8-week follow-on mindfulness program for those who wish to sustain and deepen their practice after MBSR and MBCT. The new program focuses on exploring feeling tone frame by frame, as explained in his new book, Deeper Mindfulness, and will be highlighted for today's talk as well. And now the floor is all yours, Dr. Williams. Welcome.
Thank you very much for that welcome, and welcome to those joining on Zoom as well. So let's start with an anecdote from the 1870s. In the 1870s, there was a pioneer photographer called Edward Maybridge. He was English. In fact, he liked his Anglo-Saxon heritage quite a lot, but somehow he didn't like England, so he moved to America. and he did most of his pioneering photography in America. But he wanted to answer an age-old question, which was, when a horse gallops, is there any point in the gallop when all hooves come off the ground at the same time? Artists had differed, and if you look at paintings since the year dot, some artists have horses doing one thing and other artists have horses doing another. They couldn't agree. But now with photography, Edward Maybridge reckoned he could answer it, and so he strung 12 cameras along Palo Alto racecourse, and next to each camera he had a thread across the racecourse, and each camera was set to be triggered when a horse ran past and ran into these bits of string or thread. Then each camera would take 1,000th of a second frame. And when he did the developing, you remember those, when he had to put things into baths of chemicals, baths of chemicals, and wait to see what came out, 12 pictures came out, and on one of them, he saw that the hooves were indeed lifted off the ground. The horse was floating, 1 out of 12 frames, and it settled the issue. So by slowing things down, by just freeze framing in that way, he was able to discover something that you couldn't see with the naked eye. And that's the analogy of the sense of mindfulness, and the way we've been exploring it tries to do with your mind and body and your senses and your sense of yourself, to slow things down so that we can see frame by frame what's actually going on in the mind and body. And that's what I want to talk about today. What happens? What do you notice when you slow things down? You might not see yourself float, as he found with the horses, but we might also find some really interesting things. So what I want to do is to ask, well, what is mindfulness and where does it come from? Secondly, how does it work in dealing with the sort of things that I deal with, which is serious depression and indeed serious physical problems as well, serious pain and chronic illnesses. But then move on to, from those things to how does it bring about calm for any of us in the chaos and difficulties that we all meet from day to day in our everyday lives. So first of all then, what is mindfulness? The word mindfulness is a translation of an ancient word in the Pali language, very closely related to Sanskrit. 2,500 years ago, the language in which the old Buddhist texts were written down, and the word is sati, S-A-T-I, and it translates into awareness, or you might say non-forgetfulness, the ability to attend, and as it's used, to attend, to become aware of what's going on in your mind and body from moment to moment, attending to things in the outside world and also attending to things on the inside world. And it's a sort of direct, intuitive knowing, a sort of a kindly, appreciative, but lucid awareness. Now, mindfulness varies from person to person naturally. I mean, most of us know mindlessness, you know, when we forget where we put our phone, or when we've just ended up in a room when we were searching for something, but when we get there, we can't remember what it is that we've come for. And most of us have that experience much of the time. Some people are more mindful than others, some people more mindless than others. But the point about mindfulness is that from the earliest days, it's been clear that you can cultivate it, that you can actually make yourself more mindful. And it's usually cultivated by something that we now know as meditation, though the original word actually just simply means cultivation, like cultivating a garden. A good analogy, because there's no one-to-one correspondence between cultivating a garden and your results. You've got to cultivate the garden day in, season out, and then one day you see the fruits of your labors. It's not like you go in, dig the garden, and tomorrow you get flowers and fruit. Well, usually not anyway. So cultivation, meditation, taking time to see the fruits, but cultivating indeed this sense of awareness. And that meditation helps train the mind to see things clearly from moment to moment. Now, there's been an explosion of interest in mindfulness over the last 20 years, and some of it is really sensible, others the enthusiasm has gone way beyond the evidence, but gradually the evidence is catching up with the enthusiasm. And it's now used in many contexts, from parliaments to prisons to wellness centers to centers where people are physically ill in some way or challenged in some way, and places where mental illness is rife as well. But where does it come from? Well, we've already mentioned the history from the Buddhist texts from 2,500 years ago, but and that seems like, well, maybe it's a religion or something, but actually the early Buddhists were not religious in that sense. They didn't make a distinction between sacred and secular in those days. The better analogy is the Greek schools, the Stoicism or Epicureanism or Cynicism, where you'd have a master and their disciples, Pythagoras or Pyrrho, and they would set up a school where their disciples would learn. Philosophy then was a practical way of living. That's what philosophy was to the Greeks. And so similarly in India, you had a master and his disciples, now Gautama, now known as the Buddha. And so he was investigating. But if you think about somebody like Pythagoras, who we now know as a Greek philosopher interested in, and we know him as a mathematician, he was actually investigating music as well as mathematics and spiritual realities as well, believing in the harmony of nature and the harmony of the universe. So in that sense, philosophy then was mixed in with issues that we would now call with faith and practice and how to live a virtuous life. That's what was important to the Greeks and indeed to the early Buddhists too. But mindfulness as we know it in its mainstream sort of secular use today probably is mostly attributable to a person who at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center set up a mindfulness center. He called it the Stress Reduction Center then. He was a guy called John Kabat-Zinn. And his work was setting up this center to offer mindfulness to people whose physical illness or chronic pain didn't seem to be responding anymore to the usual physical treatments. And so he set up the stress clinic for the physicians to refer patients that they felt that they couldn't help any longer. They wanted a supplement. They wanted something else as well. But there's a paradox there when you think about it. Why on earth do you think that it's good to offer people in pain something which increases their awareness? I mean, usually when you're in pain, you want anything but awareness. You don't want to think about your body. You don't want to think about much at all, but you certainly don't want to focus on your body. And yet he spent the first couple of weeks, 4 weeks indeed, encouraging people to scan their bodies, to bring attention to their bodies. That's a very curious paradox. What was going on? Well, what John Kabat-Zinn intuited, and it turned out he was right, was that the pain that people were experiencing was not just intense sensations, but for very understandable reason, that pain had become coupled and intertwined and stuck to various thoughts and emotions that weren't actually part of the pain, but were very now closely stuck to it. So thoughts like, this pain is killing me, I'll never be able to enjoy life again, why is this happening to me, and so on. So you have the sensations and you have these thoughts and you have anger and frustration and despair and hopelessness, emotions that are never very far away, but now begin to congeal with the sensations to form a sort of like a limpet-like structure. They just stick together. And you never really experience the pain by itself, those just the sensations of pain, without all these feelings winding up as well. And even if the pain goes up and down, those feelings don't go up and down. Once you get stuck in despair, very often it feels relentless and everything then gets stuck. But his intuition was that if you could bring attention, this sort of frame by frame look, if you like, at what was going on in your mind and body, you'd begin to see, that's a thought. And, that's an emotion. And that's the sensation. And this is an impulse. And gradually you begin to distinguish them. And this sort of structure begins to float apart. You see them separately, and then they're more workable. it turns out that you begin to see the sensations go up and down, and maybe a little gap in those intense sensations you'd never noticed before, because it was all under this pile of thoughts and feelings that were obscuring your view. And he published research then and found, indeed, that this turned out to be as effective as any other psychological treatment that had been discovered, which were mostly in those days based on distraction for very good reasons. So bringing awareness to the whole body and mind seemed to be really helpful. He published that in the American Journal of Psychiatry in the 1980s. And it's just as well he did, otherwise we might have never found out about it, because we, my colleagues and I, were not in the physical health area, but in the mental health area. So we were clinical psychologists, John Teasdale and myself and Zindel Siegel, working on depression and trying to understand, why is depression maintained when it is? Why does it stop, as it does sometimes? And why does it keep coming back when it does? Because we know that when you've been depressed once, about 50% chance you'll get depressed again. And if you get depressed again, there's a greater chance. There's a sort of a process of kindling going on in which depression gets more and more likely the more you've been depressed in the past. And that's a problem, because we now know that the main age that people first have their episode of depression is in their early teenage years, between 13 and 15 years of age. And that means that if it's going to take a recurrent pattern, it starts young. And we now know that by the age of 24 or 25, about 75% of people who are ever going to get depressed have been already depressed at least once by that age. So that most of the depression we see in middle age or older age is a reactivation of an earlier episode. Now, but the same thing happens. Why on earth would we think that bringing awareness to your mind and body was any good? But it turns out the same reasoning goes for this as well. That there was lots of research evidence suggesting that this sort of coagulation or entanglement of feelings and thoughts and impulses and body sensations happened in depression too. And there's lots of research to suggest that when you have been depressed once, when you get depressed, even just a little bit sad, it tends to reactivate thoughts and feelings from the last episode. And if the first episode was when you were in teenage years, then the sort of thoughts you're likely to have when you're 13 or 14 are often thoughts like, I haven't got any friends, I'm going to fail, nobody loves me, because, you know, let's face it, who doesn't go through teenage without thinking that at least part of the time? But if a depression sets in and those become the currency of the depression, then you can see how later on, even in your 30s and 40s and 50s, if the sad mood reactivates that, those sort of thoughts, I don't have any friends, I'm useless, I'm a failure, I'm no good, they come back, and you're back, as it were, like a child thinking, nobody loves me, I'm no good. And that's a horrible state to be in. But given that there are times when people are depressed, when most people are quite well, our challenge was, can we take people when they're well and try to prevent the next episode of depression? Because there's quite a lot of treatments for depression, but at that time there was no preventative work. There was no way of taking people who we knew vulnerable and training them up to prevent the next episode. But with mindfulness, you can do it. Why? Because when a treatment for depression works, it works by helping people stand back from all this stuff that's going on just long enough to identify, oh, that's a thought. I recognize that. That's a mental event going through my mind. It doesn't mean it's true. Just because I say I'm no good, that you can put it in inverted commas, let it be there and let it float away in its own time without getting involved with it and saddened by it and despairing about it. And it turns out mindfulness is very good, especially for training people to this. You don't have to wait until people are depressed, because this idea of standing back from your thinking is really easy to cultivate. Well, easy. It can be cultivated just by sitting quietly for 10 minutes. Because when you sit, well, after about 10 seconds, you know, your mind will wander. So you're sitting, you're doing a meditation, you're sitting there, hoping for a bit of peace and calm, maybe. We might do this in a moment. And guess what? Within a few seconds, Oh, I meant to send an email. Oh, I should have bought bread. Oh, this chair is a bit uncomfortable. Should I have used another chair? Maybe I'll go to the sofa. No, that would be too relaxing. I'd go to sleep. All right, I'll sit here then. Okay, right. Focus, focus, focus. That bread. What bread? Oh, the baker's closed. Oh no. Yeah? Does that sound familiar to those of you who've meditated? Okay. So you get lots of practice, even when you're fairly well, and it's just trivial stuff. You get lots of practice at seeing all this stuff coming like on a conveyor belt, and often with a bit of urgency. Oh, that email, and you're almost out of your chair on your computer or on your phone. So you recognize the urgency of it, and you're able just, oh, yeah. And then a few seconds later, and the email thought goes. Well, comes back often, but yeah. So you get the sense of thoughts coming and going, and you get practice, 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 practice at seeing your thoughts as mental events, sort of standing back from them. And the hope was, and indeed we've now found it to be the case, that when you practice that enough when you're well, when that sad mood begins to creep back, as we know it will for all of us, and it starts to reactivate, I'm no good, I'm useless, there's a chance you will see that as a thought and be able, because you've got the skill now of standing back, and you've been, I recognize that, it's a thought. I don't have to take it so personally or so seriously. And the evidence is, as Elisa said, that is effective at reducing the risk of depression. We know that overall, over 9 to 11 trials, it reduces the risk of depression by about 30% for right across the board. And for those with the most severe and recurrent depression, it reduces the risk by about 50% in the next 12 months, which is usually how long we monitor it for before we let people leave our research trials. So depression is a big burden, and there is something we can do with it with mindfulness. And because mindfulness now we know works really well with physical problems as well as now depression problems, and we also know that depression comes along with most other problems that any of us can get. Depression is never far away. So it's really helpful to have something that works both with physical and emotional and mental problems as well. So those are some of the ways where mindfulness comes from. What is mindfulness? Where does it come from? In terms of the ancient traditions, but also the modern mindfulness movement with John Kabat-Zinn. First of all, working with pain, then working with, in our work with mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. So I now want to turn to the other question, which is, well, how can it help restore calm in the chaos? But before I do that, maybe since we've been talking about meditation, maybe we should just try 3 minutes, shall we? So if you're up for this at home, and if you're up for this here, and because I'll invite you to close your eyes. You don't have to close your eyes, but if you do, that's fine. But it means if you don't want to meditate, nobody will see that you're not, because actually meditation doesn't show up. So you can just sit there and just wait until we've finished if you don't feel like meditating. So here we go. So if you've got your feet, both feet flat on the floor, that gives a sense of grounding. And allowing yourself to bring your awareness to just the fact of sitting here, knowing you're sitting. And we'll take a 3-minute breathing space together. So first of all, making this change in your posture shows have a sense of presence, of waking up, of willing to sit here and see what's happening in mind and body for a few moments. And step 1 of the 3-minute breathing space is simply to notice what's going on in mind and body right now. So you might notice thoughts going past on the conveyor belt of the mind. They may come as thoughts or images. Let's see if we can notice that. And there may be feelings around. maybe restlessness or sleepiness or sadness or happiness. And maybe body sensations that you can notice. And see if it's possible for these thoughts and feelings and body sensations to be allowed to be here as they are. Just sensing them clearly, seeing them clearly, without having to do anything about them. And then step 2 of the breathing space is to gather your attention and place your attention just in one place in the body. Now, most commonly people use the breath, so feel free to bring your attention to one place where you feel the breath moving in your body, maybe the nose or the chest or the abdomen. If that's difficult for any reason, then maybe focusing on the feet or the hands. And wherever you choose, just staying there for a little while, a few moments, and tuning in to the sensations that you notice when your attention arrives there, the breath or feet or hands. And you may notice that the sensations change from moment to moment. Some of them rapidly, some of them more slowly. So focusing our attention. If the mind wanders, simply notice where it went and then gently escort it back to where you had intended it to be. And then the third step of the breathing space, widening out the attention to take in the body as a whole. However your body is for you and whatever its history, allowing this kindly awareness to bathe the body, aware of the whole body sitting here. Coming home to the body. Sense of spaciousness. The sense of allowing your body to be just as it is. Sense of calmness and peace. And then when you're ready, beginning to move fingers and toes, allowing your eyes to open if they've been closed, and taking in your surroundings again. So how is mindfulness relevant in the midst of the chaos of the world, which doesn't seem to stop? Well, there are 3 things I'd like to talk about, all 3 of which can come about when we get sort of lost in the chaos, lost in the busyness of life, exhausted by what happens to us. And the first one is how we get distracted, how we get our attention, our mind pulled this way and pulled that way by all that's happening in the world and all that's happening in our lives. The second thing I'd like to talk about is the sort of brooding, worrying that can happen sometimes. So the first is distraction, the second is brooding and worrying about things. And the third is a sense of losing motivation, a sort of sense of joylessness. So let's take each one of these in turn. So we'll start with this distraction. You might notice that we talked about calm and stability. And how can you get stability when there's so much going on? So what is this? What is distraction about? Well, it's useful to start with an analogy. If you think of yourself when you go out to a bar or cafe, many bars or cafes now, you've noticed, have a TV screen in the corner, sometimes more than one. And have you noticed what happens when you're in the middle of a conversation or sitting there and the TV flickers in the corner of your eye? What happens? Yep, somebody went, exactly. Your attention switches there, even if you're not interested in it. Now, you might look once to see if you're really interested in whatever the daytime television is, or the football match, or whatever it is, a soccer match, or hockey match. But even if you're not interested, perhaps it's a rerun of something, you've seen it already. If it continues to flicker, your mind will continue to go there until you sort of shuffle in your chair away from and just you don't see the screen anymore. Very difficult to have a conversation though when you've turned like that, yeah. But what's going on there? Well, neuroscientists now tell us that attention will always tend to go to a place of uncertainty. And there are very good reasons, of course, evolutionary for that. A flicker in the corner of your eye might mean a predator. But it's not just that, it's that we get on in life, moving through space, moving through our world, by reducing uncertainty, taking action to reduce uncertainty, to sort of minimize the error, they call it officially. And so any flicker in the corner of the room is immediately a region of uncertainty, and our attention is pre-primed to go there. And that also will be the same for when you remembered the email in your meditation or the bread you didn't buy. An idea pops up, something that's not yet complete, a task that's not yet finished. It pops up and it's a region of uncertainty. Your attention has to go there. That's why your mind wanders in meditation. And mind wandering is actually what you need to have in meditation, because that's the training. If your mind never wandered, you wouldn't have any training. It'd be like a gymnasium without any equipment. You wouldn't actually be able to train the mind. So we need the mind to wander. So we need this distraction. But it can be very painful when what our mind is doing is being pulled around this way and that. And as we know, as we juggle things in our lives, we often feel at the end of the day really exhausted. And that's sometimes, we say, because we've got so much to do. It's been such a busy day. Well, that's true, but there's something else as well. Part of the exhaustion comes not just from the amount that we've done, but from switching from one thing to the other. Because as you switch, there's a cost. Now, there's a very good way of finding this out for yourself in a little tiny example we'll do now. If I say the word distraction, and I spell it to myself, D-I-S-T-R-A-C-T-I-O-N, distraction, that's got 11 letters. And you can do that in, well, I mean, let's see. Maybe you could try it yourself. If I've got my stopwatch, if you spell the word distraction as fast as you can, this is a bit unfair to spring this on you, I know. But if you try to spell distraction as fast as you can, and I will time you, and just put your hand up when you've finished, and we'll see how it goes, okay? So start now. Okay, that's very good. That's for less than 4 seconds, actually. So 4 seconds to spell distraction. I don't know how people got on at home, but if you're trying it at home, 4 seconds is pretty good. Okay, now there are 11 letters, I think, in the word distraction. So how fast can you count from 1 to 11? At home, you can try this as well, starting now. Okay, 2 seconds. Okay, so 4 seconds, 2 seconds. So you can count and you can spell distraction in a total of 6 seconds. Pretty good. Very good, in fact. Okay, now, all I want you to do is simply alternate them. So it's D1, I2, S3, T, okay? So once again, I'll use my super duper stopwatch to time you. And you can do this at home as well, starting now. Okay, yeah. So that's a pretty good cadre of hands gone up after about 18 to 20 seconds. Not bad, not bad. Took me 18 seconds when I tried this morning. So yeah, so 18 seconds to count and spell when you're interleaving it. Now, what happened? 6 seconds became 18 seconds. How on earth did that happen? That is called the switching cost. The switching cost. And psychologists who study this usually do hard tasks on computers that only millisecond timing to look at subtle switching costs. But that's a very obvious way of finding switching costs. And I don't know what you felt, but it seems like it's really hard to remember where you were. So it takes time to sort of get back to it. So that's one thing that happens. But also there's something else which is even cleverer that the mind does. And this is called inhibition of return. The attentional system in the mind has a really good way of making sure you don't keep slipping back. I mean, if for example, in a conversation, you kept, if I was talking to you now and I kept slipping back to the words I'd just used, then it would get very distracting, yeah? And so we need a device in the mind that just damps down something that's just gone. And that inhibition of return is also used in things like searching. If you're searching for somebody in a crowd, you know, you've arranged to meet somebody, but there's lots of people around. So you're searching for your friend. Then you don't want to keep slipping back and searching the same people. You know, if I was looking for somebody and I looked at this row, very nice. I wouldn't want to keep sort of slipping back and seeing, are they there? Are they there? Are they there? No. I'd want to sort of inhibit them, apologies, and look at other people. Interestingly, we now know that inhibition, when you've actually seen somebody who's not your friend, the inhibition stays not just in that place where they are, but the object that they are. So it follows them around. So if they move, the inhibition moves with them. It's an amazing facility the mind has to do this. That work is by Stephen Tipper, who was at Bangor, then recently at York, recently retired, Stephen Tipper. Inhibition of return, part of the family of negative priming. So we attend by activating something in the mind, but when we attend, we activate some things, but we naturally damp down others. And this inhibition is important for attention. And one of the things we inhibit is what's just happened or what we've just looked at. Inhibition of return. So did you notice that? D1, I, 2, S, and you're just busy suppressing your counting to do the alphabet. Is that right? Yeah. And then you have to get back to the counting again. I'm confusing myself here now. And then it's going to take 2 or 3 hours to get through this talk, so I better stop. If I'm switching all the time. So switching cost. So one of the reasons why you're exhausted at the end of the day is when there's lots and lots of tasks. You know, and we know this, if you're doing something and something distracts you, like you get a ping on your phone and you see a message or an email, and so you answer it quickly to get rid of it. You get back to what you're doing. But what this is saying is it takes time to get back to what you're doing. Yeah. And guess what? There's another ping because the person just responded to your response. So you haven't really actually dealt with it at all. You've just kept a conversation going in parallel. And so the task that you were doing is going to take longer because of that than it would have done if you just summarized all the time it took to do the task itself. So instead of an hour, it takes 2 hours to do a document you're working on. And the emails will actually take longer because half your mind is in your document. And the emails. So if we could just occasionally just do this thing, of course, it's not always possible, I know, but just do a block of this task, then a block of that task, it would really help to organize this tendency to switch from one thing to the other. So that's something which we can do. And actually, when we notice ourselves distracting, there's also a little meditation you can do as well. So maybe I can show you that meditation. Again, 2 or 3 minutes if you'd like. Okay. So when you find yourself switching, it's really helpful to just have one anchor to come back to just one anchor. And most of the time in meditation, the anchor people come back to is the breath. But as we hinted in that meditation we did earlier, it's not the only thing. There's lots of other things you can do. You can come to other parts of the body. And so in this short meditation, 2-minute meditation, we'll try what it's like to come to the breath, but also the feet and the hands and the contact with chair. So let's explore that and experiment with that. So if you'd like to do this, again, don't worry if you don't. You can just sit it out and letting your eyes close if that feels comfortable, but keeping your eyes open if that feels better for you, and just lowering your gaze or gazing at an object in the room. And then at a certain point, gathering your attention and placing it now on the feet. So see what sensations there are in your feet when your attention arrives. Maybe tingling, vibration, or no sensations at all. That's okay. Just register a blank. And see if it's possible to let the attention rest here for a few moments. Just abiding here. Being curious about what sensations are changing and what just seeming to stay for longer. And then maybe taking a bit of a deeper breath. And on the out breath, switching your attention from the feet to the contact with whatever you're sitting on. And being curious about the sensations here. Maybe a sense of pressure, of weight. Is there tingling or vibration here as well? And what's changing? And now taking a bit of a deeper breath. And on the out breath, switching your attention and shifting it to your hands. And noticing what's going on in your hands right now. Maybe noticing the palms of your hands. And now the backs of the hands. And the fingers and thumbs. Maybe aware of what your hands are resting on and the sense of contact. And then taking a deeper breath. And on the out breath, coming to the breath itself. So, as we did before, one place where you feel the breath moving, maybe in the nostrils, back of the throat perhaps, or the chest or the lower abdomen. Some sensation that reminds you that you're breathing. And moving in close to the sensations. Seeing them clearly, sensing them clearly. And then choosing either to stay with the breath, if that feels like the most comfortable anchor to stay with for your attention, or to move back to the feet, or the contact with seat, or the hands. In the midst of the noise that sometimes happens in the world and in our mind, which for you right now provides a signal, the sensations you can be aware of most easily. And if you can't choose, you could just stay with the breath. And once again, when the mind wanders, just noticing where it went, acknowledging that it's trying to help you, it's doing the best it can, maybe even thanking the mind before returning slowly to where you'd intended it to be, where your attention is focused. Feet, the seat, hands, or breath. And as this short meditation comes to an end, remembering that at any time of the day, if things feel out of control or chaotic, it can sometimes be really helpful just to ground yourself in this way, just noticing your feet on the floor or your body on the chair, or the hands, or the breath. This can just bring for a moment a sense of calm in the midst of whatever you're experiencing then and there. And now, moving fingers and toes, opening your eyes if they've been closed, and taking in your surroundings again. So, attention being hijacked, being pulled in various directions can be a problem, but we can begin to cultivate a calmness through the meditation of stability or finding your ground. So the second thing I'd like to talk about is rumination and brooding and the sort of way in which the mind, once it gets latched onto something, especially in the middle of the night, but sometimes during the day as well, just churns round and round and round and never seems to stop. It seems a bit relentless. And I just want to talk briefly about something that we've been exploring in the last 2 or 3 years, as Alyssa mentioned, this sense of feeling tone, the sense that everything that happens to us, every experience, moment by moment, if we look at it very carefully, every bit, every sort of cycle of rumination or worry starts with something that kicks the next cycle. And what it starts with is a brief moment where something is pleasant or unpleasant or somewhere in between. So the leading edge of any emotional reaction, the thing that happens at the start, is a moment which you might call a tipping point moment, where you become aware of something pleasant. And very often you react to it by wanting more of it, and then you can't get more, so you get frustrated. Or more usually for the sort of work I do, an unpleasant moment, which triggers sort of rumination, memories and stuff like that, which won't let you go. Sometimes it's neutral and you just zone out, nothing much is happening, you get bored, and before you know it, you're sort of looking in the fridge for something to eat, or you're scrolling on your phone, which you didn't really intend to do, but somebody must have sent you a message, surely, and perhaps some distraction. So, but all of that, whether it's scrolling on your phone or doom scrolling in the middle of the night or channel hopping because you're bored or ruminating, each cycle starts with this moment of feeling tone, something which is pleasant, unpleasant, or neither. And to illustrate what I mean by feeling tone, think about something simple, like if I said to you, is this pleasant or unpleasant? Garbage blowing about the street because a bin has fallen over. Is that pleasant or unpleasant? Okay, yes, unpleasant, I think. Me too, I think, yeah. What about sunshine after rain? Yeah, mostly pleasant, I think. What about a pile of dirty dishes in the sink? Yeah? Or even worse, somebody else had promised to clean them up and they haven't. Yeah, yeah. Or what about the smell of fresh bread, freshly baked bread? Yeah. I'm told that's the most worldwide, constant, most universal liked smell, the smell of freshly baked bread. And I can believe it, actually. And notice about those, you didn't have to think very hard. You didn't have to sort of think, oh, no, it's freshly baked bread. Now let me think about that. It just comes to you. It's a given in that moment, even with an image of freshly baked bread. But if you actually went down and you passed a baker's and you actually smelt it, again, it would be a sort of a natural thing. It wouldn't be a lot of thought about it. And that's the nature of this feeling tone. It's a wordless, felt sense of how things are. It's not like a cognitive judgment of an analysis. You don't have to go out hunting for it. And so even if you look around the room, as your eye goes around the room, or if you're at home, just look around, just spin around in your chair away from the screen and look at the things in your room. And you might find that some things you see in your room will give you a lift your spirits. It might be a photograph or a book that somebody's given you, or whatever. If you look around your room now and you see a pile of books that you forgot to return to somebody, or a letter sticking out at the bottom that you don't know what it is, but you suspect it might be a tax demand, these sort of things probably take your spirits down. And again, you don't have to think about it, yes? So, and notice how as well, that moment of pleasant or unpleasant summarizes all the past conditioning and learning with that thing. Those sort of brown envelopes you get tax demands in, they have a long history of conditioning, right? So you have to really notice what's the feeling tone right in this moment, and you get a hint of the conditioning that comes with it. But also that conditioning meets a current context, because context can also vary the impact of conditioning. So you might love chocolate, for example, and that's got a long conditioning history. It has with me anyway. But then if you've just eaten a huge meal and somebody offers you the same chocolate, how is it? Is it pleasant or unpleasant? Okay, yes, I can see I can see people that would eat the chocolate here. But sometimes, oh, no, thank you, unpleasant. Well, okay, the 10th chocolate they offer you then. Yeah, oh, still head nods, okay. Somebody likes a lot of chocolate. But you can see how, if it meets a current context. I remember I was taking my grandson to an event, and I'd gone to fetch him early because he's never on time. But at this time he was, for some reason. So we started off and I thought, oh, we're going to be there early. He's going to be hanging around. He hates hanging around. And then I came up against a stoplight. And normally stoplights are, just frustrate most of us, because they stop you in your tracks, don't they? I hope they do. This stoplight was a big relief, because we were going to stop there for about a minute. I thought, oh, we won't be so early. That's a big relief. So there's a stop sign, which got a past conditioning, meeting a current context, changed the feeling tone. So the whole of the Deeper Mindfulness program is hinged around this idea of knowing your feeling tone, because if you begin to notice, you begin to get, like that photographer did, to the critical frame in the sequence, where you can see the hinge point or the tipping point for the next possible cascade. Why? Because the pleasantness or unpleasantness gives a sort of direction of travel, because when you think about it, it's there hardwired into our biological systems, even single-celled creatures. I mean, in biology at school, you probably learned about, I don't know, amoebas, which those single-celled creatures, I think they're single-celled creatures with a little sort of thing on top, a little flag on top that drives it this way or that. And all the amoeba needs to do is to move away from toxicity and towards nutrients. That's basically how it spends its life, yeah? So we have hardwired into us this sense of moving away from things. And so feeling tone gives us a sense of direction of travel, towards or away. But the intensity of feeling tone also gives us a sense of urgency, a sense of I need to take action now. And so with feeling tone, it's really good to notice it, because you can take account of this sense of needing to take action, because very often the brain is working all the time trying to assemble plans and actions just in case, just in case, just in case. Most actions you won't actually take. And it's really helpful occasionally just to learn, when you feel very, to say something simple. And what we teach our people in our classes to say in that moment is, on an out breath, to say, no action needed right now. So you might like to try that just for a moment, not a formal meditation, just on an out breath, in the next few breaths, on an out breath, just say to yourself, no action needed right now. No action needed in this moment. No action needed right now. How does it feel? Many people say there's a sort of, a sense of calmness, even though they didn't realize that they were at all sort of het up or anxious, and maybe we aren't het up or anxious, But actually, the brain is assembling plans and actions on the fringes of consciousness all the time. By saying no action needed right now, it sort of lets it go a bit. It just takes you off the hook. And actually, it's not saying be passive, don't take action in the world, don't do anything good in the world. It's actually saying that often we don't do what we need to do, what we'd like to do, because we've got so much going on. So no action needed right now releases us from all the irrelevant actions to see how to take wise action, skillful action in the world, whether it's the world outside or the world inside. So third thing I promised to get to, so that's the rumination and brooding, just to finish that one off. Ruminating and brooding is basically the brain getting to simulating a lot of actions it should have taken or will take in the future or should take now. So rumination and worry are the brain over busy at producing actions, possible actions. And given that most of them you won't carry out, it's really helpful to say no action needed right now, just to explore what it's like to let go. So finally, what about this thing about when motivation fails? When you're stressed or depressed or exhausted, very often there's a sense of wanting to withdraw from the world. You know, even things that you used to enjoy, you give up. You know, if you used to play the violin stays in its case. If you used to sing in a choir, the choir hasn't been visited for a long time. If you used to sew or knit, it just stays in the drawer very often. You know, it's very difficult. And even just thinking about it sometimes makes you think, oh, no, thank you. Depression and exhaustion seems to switch your motivation off. And it can end up very joyless. What's going on there? And how has feeling tone got anything to do with it? Well, it turns out that the mind has a very natural and well-honed mechanism for helping you focus. We've talked about distraction. The mind has got a way of trying to help you focus on the projects you set yourself. And that is simply, it damps down other things. It boosts the thing you're attending to, but as we said, every boost involves an inhibition. And it damps down alternative activities. And the more attractive the alternatives, the more it has to boost, has to push them away. And the pushing away, we might think, oh, well, all we've done is sort of put them away and we'll get back to them. But actually, what happens is they become devalued. It's a phenomenon called distraction devaluation. It's the process by which the mind devalues what would naturally distract it. And here's a little experiment that colleague Jane Raymond did when she was at Bangor. She had people do a little task on a computer, not a very complicated task, but there were distractors. They were objects or photographs of people. And the distractors were either close to the task, so they needed a lot of sort of pushing away to do the task, or they were quite separate, out in the periphery. Then later on, when the task was over, she showed people lots of pictures of objects and lots of faces. And in the list she showed people were the things that they'd used as distractors. And she asked them to rate them on how pleasant they were. And for the people, she asked them, how trustworthy does this person seem to you? How trustworthy? And guess what? The people or objects that had been used as distractors in the experiment were not so well liked. The objects were thought to be dreary and boring, but they'd been distracted, and the people were less trustworthy. And what's more, the things, the people and the objects that were very close to the task and therefore needed a lot of inhibition were suffered the most in terms of their valuation. They were devalued the most. So in getting through life, we often have to do one thing and push away another. And have you noticed that the things we push away actually get a bit devalued? You know, if you haven't taken that library book back in the days when there were libraries, I don't know, the libraries are opened again yet? And you know how you have a book on this shelf and you know it has to be taken back and then you put it near the door so you won't forget it. But often you just can't be, you know, I'm going shopping, I haven't got time to go to the library. I'm doing something else, I haven't got time to. I'm going to work, I haven't got time to go to the library. So every time it's sort of, and what's happening is the library book is acquiring an unpleasant taste. Yeah, and the poor book is just sitting there. It's doing nothing to deserve this. But every time we look at it, it's now more and more negative. So not only is your fine mounting up, but actually the book itself is getting more negative. And now notice how when we get depressed, of course, that we've got a big project on. The big project is sorting yourself out. And so everything is devalued. Everything is a distractor from the important thing of actually sorting out yourself. So we've begun to understand what might be at the root of some aspects of joylessness and lack of motivation. Again, it's the normal process of the mind that's backfired. It's a normal process of the mind that's backfired. And what's underlying distraction? A normal process of the mind that backfires. What understands rumination and brooding? It's taking action. It's the brain trying to help you by taking action, but it just won't stop. And it's backfired. The mind is doing the best it can. So when we meditate, we can be assured that whatever we find going on in the mind, it's trying to help us. It's trying to keep us safe, but it's doing so in a way that's inconvenient. But with mindfulness, gradually, you can begin to turn towards all that, to see its elements, to see how it's meshing and how it's floating apart. And then things are more workable. And the evidence is that people find that with these sort of skills, when they've learnt them, it doesn't take away all your problems, and it won't stop the world from being chaotic. But in the midst of it, people seem to say, I've got more space and more calm, and I'm kind to myself. And when people decide and discern that they're kind to themselves, other people notice it too. And that's a remarkable thing. Thank you very much for your attention for now.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Williams, for the talk. We'll move on to the Q&A session. So if for those of you who are here, if you could kindly just raise your hand if you have any questions. And then when it's your turn, you can just press on the red button until it lights up, and then the microphone will turn on for you to speak. For those of you who are on Zoom, I don't know if you can see me. For those of you who are on Zoom, you can just put it in the chat box, and one of us will look at the question and ask Dr. Williams on behalf of you. So please feel free to do that.
Maybe I just start us off. So thank you very much. Truly appreciated, and many aha moments in the lecture. As a mother of teenagers, I see them on TikTok, Instagram, and all the time, which of course are like very short little switching attention all the time. But in this, I think, chasing kind of little dopamine hits with each new little clip that comes along. And intuitively, I would think that mindfulness could be helpful there if you can actually get the kids to do that, because it seems to me this would probably, at least initially, take a little bit more effort without the immediate dopamine kind of response and reward that is felt with being on TikTok. So I was just wondering whether you've looked into that, or whether you've got any advice on how to deal with that, practically speaking.
So many people have offered mindfulness to small children and teens with exactly this in mind. And sometimes through school, sometimes after school clubs. The evidence is mixed. So in general, if you do a sort of a meta-analysis, it looks okay, and like it brings some benefit. We've just finished a huge trial in the United Kingdom called the Myriad trial, which didn't seem to work for the 11 to 13-year-olds, 12 and 13-year-olds. But then that we were constrained in that trial to take teachers who hadn't done mindfulness, to train them up, and then to teach them the syllabus, and then they did it. And I think the second or third class was being recorded and was the trial class, whereas the evidence that had been gathered before that tended to have mindfulness teachers who were quite practiced, either school teachers or mindfulness practitioners who could come in and do it based on a lot of experience, a sort of bottom-up mindfulness approach rather than the top-down we used. However, the mindfulness was very good for the teachers who were practicing it. They got less stressed, and the school climate did shift as well, which is good for the kids and the teachers and all the other staff as well. But just looking, I mean, Penn State has got a big program of mindfulness for schools, and others have as well. And the hope is that it will increase well-being and also allow children to go beyond just being told that this is not good for them to seeing and discerning that actually taking just small gaps can be good for them. Because schools now spend a great deal of time telling kids that it's no good for them. I mean, and parents as well seem to echo it. So, and clearly, often we get nowhere with that because these are such compelling things. And one thing is to focus on things that are small and doable, like counting to 3 before you pick up your phone. That might be good for any of us, actually, just making a choice. Do I really need to pick up my phone right now or not at that moment? Or should I just leave it there for at least 30 seconds? Because we know that the urge to do anything that is a dopamine hit will come, it'll have a rise time, and then it'll have a fall time. And so if we can get children to be curious about what's the rise time and fall time, first they have to think, yeah, I need to deal with this a bit. But then if they can be curious about that, then they will be their own experimenters. They will be their own able to do it on their own, not because they're being told to do. Yeah. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Thank you.
I noticed, Professor, when you were talking about the felt sense, you introduced it in a very, I would say, like very fundamental way, like pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and then you don't have to think about it. So I was quite curious, how does it contrast with some more cognitive approach, which you have to name, you have to be very definitive about how you feel, describe like different way of feelings. I would appreciate your feedback on that. Yeah.
Okay, so it's related to that in a sense, because we know that labeling emotions is pretty good for you. I mean, so there's research on even people with spider phobia, for example, if they say, I'm feeling fearful right now and naming their fear, that actually they can get closer to the spider in experiments they've done. And other people just naming emotions can, sadness is here. This is helpful where you're using language to sort of identify something. And again, it helps you decenter a bit from that. So there's some element of that going on here too. But it's also very simple, and it's more, so yeah. The analogy I sometimes use is if I threw a ball to you and you caught it, you'd know instantly how hard or soft it was. You wouldn't sort of have to think, okay, yeah. But you could go hard or soft, but the feeling would already be there. And similarly with feeling tone, the sense of teaching yourself just to know what's already there and how it's impacting you rather than having to think about it, because it really is quite simple. And its simplicity is quite good because when your mind is going on, run, and you say you can't sleep at night, it's really helpful when you've been in your thoughts for the last 10 minutes, quarter of an hour, or whatever, to go to when you wake up and realize what's happening, to say, these thoughts are unpleasant. That's all I need to know. They're unpleasant. Maybe even it's natural not to like them. It's okay not to like them because they're unpleasant. Why should I like them? So the sense of allowing the unpleasantness to be felt, that itself, for many people, is enough to go, oh, yeah, the acknowledgement it's unpleasant. So it is simple. It is rather like labeling, but with slightly less cognition involved. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, thanks so much. Really wonderful talk. When you talked about motivational loss, you didn't mention remedy, because you did before about the other two. So how does one counteract that devaluing of things?
Okay, so yeah, I just ran out of time. So, well, one possibility is to look at things that you've been putting off in a small way. So procrastination, for example. So you could sit for just a few moments and just bring your library book to mind, or whatever it is that you've been putting off. Allow it to remain on the workbench of the mind in meditation and notice its feeling tone. And what can happen there is a clearer sense of why, you know, it feels difficult to do. And that can sometimes bring enough of a resolution to do it. When you see the library book there, you've already taken the sting out of the unpleasantness which it's acquired. It's gone back to being the library book it was 3 months ago when you first put it on near the door to take back, because you've sort of released this accumulated conditioning from the sort of the memory processes, the cache in the mind. So that's one thing that one can do, just bring it into your meditation. But more generally, what we ask people to do is to, every 24 hours, perhaps at the end of each day, to do an end of day reflection where you bring to mind the events of the day. And as they come to mind, you notice what you appreciate most about the last 24 hours and what you appreciate least. So now if you could just spend a minute or 30 seconds now thinking about the last 24 hours, bringing it to mind, and maybe bringing something that you appreciated in the last 24 hours to mind. I'll leave a bit of silence so you can do that. Something that lifts your spirits a bit, or lifted your spirits in the last few hours. And see if it's possible to ask this question. How would I, in the next 24 hours or 48 hours, could I schedule a similar activity? What is it about that that I might be able to do again in the next 24 or 48 hours? No ideas might come to mind now, but it could be a reflection for later. And similarly, of the last 24 or 48 hours, let's take the last day, is there anything I've appreciated least, something that weighs me down? The analogy we use is a hot air balloon. Something lifts the balloon, but something weighs it down. So what are the things that are weighing you down? And ask, what do I appreciate least of the last 24 hours? And I'll leave a little bit of silence now so you can just maybe bring that to mind. And then when you're ready, if you choose, you could say, if that thing happened again in the next few days, how could I deal with it more skillfully? I might not be able to get rid of it, but how could I deal with it more skillfully? And then maybe bring to mind something you appreciated again to finish on a positive note in the last little while. Something you appreciated. Perhaps saying to yourself, it's okay to like this, savoring it in your memory. Okay, so in this way, and that's week 7 of this flow-on course, the Feeling Tone course, in this way, you're beginning to sort of take account of the things that weigh you down and the things that lift your spirits. And there's a sort of even-handedness about that meditation, which speaks to looking without rose-tinted spectacles or without dark glasses looking at your dark world, but to look at the balance between things you appreciate, things you don't appreciate. Interestingly, that's part of the tradition, from the mindfulness tradition, that sense of cultivating appreciation. But that particular meditation is also used in the Ignatian tradition in Christian spirituality. It's called the examine, the sense of day by day noticing what's lifted your spirits and what's weighed you down. And the Ignatian tradition use it to help people choose their vocation. That when people say, what do I do next in my life? That can be very confusing for people. And the Ignatians say, just every day, notice what nourishes you day by day, what nourishes you day by day. And just do that every day. Gradually, you'll get a sense of what nourishes me and where your life would like to go. And then if an opportunity comes up, you know that's the one to take. So there's an even-handedness about that. And that seems to be able to correct this sense of being weighed down by joylessness. So thank you for the question that allowed me to finish the talk. You noticed.
We do have a few questions from people on Zoom. So the first one, why is it so common for depression to manifest in early teenage years?
Nobody really knows the answer to that question. We do know that earlier on in the 20th century, people tended not to get depressed until late middle age. And for some reason that nobody really understands, the age of onset of depression got earlier and earlier by about a decade every decade. So that by the sort of 70s and 80s, it was becoming clearer that people were getting depressed in their 20s, and by the end of the century, in the early teenage years. Whether that continues, we don't know. Some people speculate that it's to do with, what's going on in schools and so on, but actually, most of the things that we blame for teenage depression don't take account of the fact that actually this trend was going on throughout the 20th century. It happened before iPhones, for example. So we can't blame the technology for that as much as we'd like to. So much of this are long-term trends, and they're very difficult to understand. What we do know, however, is that however depression starts, what we need to understand is what maintains it. And we do know that what tends to maintain it is this sense of everything coming together. I'm no good, I'm useless, and then the sad mood and feeling of worthlessness and all the body sensations associated with that. And that's when therapy can be useful. What we do know is that often in teenage years, people don't seek therapy treatment, when actually a little bit then might be quite helpful. Going and talking to a teacher you respect or a counselor you respect might very early on be quite helpful. So I do encourage people to do that if they can. Yeah.
Great, perfect, thank you. We do have another question, just staying on the topic of younger children. This participant on Zoom is an educator and school counselor, wondering if there is any specific strategies to support children and individuals with ADHD and when they're constantly switching between distractions and tasks needing focus.
Yeah, it is a big problem, isn't it? And well, one of the things is, can you do, within the meditation domain, let's talk about that. There are mindfulness courses for ADHD. Susan Bergels, B-O-G-E-L-S, Susan Bergels in Amsterdam has developed a mindfulness course for teens with ADHD and autism spectrum problems and has pretty good results with that. She also does a parallel program with the parents. And there's quite a lot of evidence that actually the parents of children with ADHD often remember that they had something rather like that themselves and might well have been diagnosed with that themselves had the diagnosis been used then. So treating the parents as well, or offering parents mindfulness and the children at the same time, they have one joint class at the beginning, I think one joint class at the end, but then they go there, have separate classes. But they do encourage once a week for the children and the parents to meditate together, once a week. Maybe neither would tolerate it more often than that, but once a week they do. And I've seen lovely videos of a child and her father meditating together. It's really lovely. But and that actually goes for depression as well, that we know that from cognitive therapy trials in depression for teens, that even if therapy works well in a trial that actually shows big effect sizes on the teens, if the mum and dad have got depression, or mum or dad have got depression, often there's a much less of a response, even though it's the same therapist doing the same things. So working with parents as well as children. If you're a school counsellor, however, of course, you might not have access to the parents. But let's get to one little thing you can do. There's a guy called Nirbhay Singh, who's the editor of the journal Mindfulness, actually. And if you look up his name and his interest in schools-based and other mindfulness, he advocates for something called the soles of the feet meditation. The soles of the feet meditation. And it's very simply, and he started it with adults with learning disabilities and mental handicap and so on, who had problems controlling their anger and rage. And he would teach them, whenever they felt a bit upset, just breathe out and put their attention in the soles of their feet. That's all they had to do. Just put their attention to the soles of the feet and leave it there. And he found that it was really very, very helpful. So he started doing it with school children as well and teaching them the soles of the feet meditation. It's very simple. Whenever you just feel you want an outburst or whatever it is, see if you can put your attention to the soles of the feet. So I think there are these little things, and he's now, I think, written a book on using the soles of the feet meditation. So I think, and it's very simple, it seems to be very effective. But as your question will know, that ADHD has got this curious property that as far as the child is concerned, they just cannot prevent this behavior. I mean, it's the analogy that somebody used to me is, you know, if you've got to, when you're in bed, if you've got to turn over in bed, right? You just can't, you know, you must turn over. You can't stay there. You know, it's just an urge to turn over that must be met. And ADHD is a similar thing. It's an urge that must be satisfied. And so I'm sure the person who asked the question understands that from their experience, there's a way in which the first thing that we as onlookers need to do, or as parents, is to understand that the children don't have the control that we wish they had. And so there's, and to be mindful ourselves as parents is often one of the best things we can do.
Thank you. I was wondering, so I know that depression is the term is based on a set of symptoms, and then we label it as depression, but there could be multiple causes of depression, right? It could be a lack of sunlight. It could be something more involved with the microbiome. It could be several stressors on top of each other. So I'm wondering if in your research or other research that's been done, if you know if different causes of depression make it affect the effectiveness of mindfulness on the depression, or if there are some more stubborn forms of depression.
Okay, so it's true there are some more stubborn forms of depression. We talked about depression coming and going, but in about 20% of cases, it seems to stick in the sort of chronic depression, sometimes called treatment-resistant depression, which seems a bit unfair, actually, on the person themselves, because who knows what treatments they're being resistant to. So that does go on. When we looked in our very first trial in whether the depression was that more endogenous biological depression or more reactive and related to incidents in your life sort of depression, because that's by far the most well understood aspect, endogenous versus reactive or depression, it made no difference to the outcome. So the outcome was good or bad, whatever, it didn't make any difference to that. And a colleague of mine has done some work on seasonal affective disorder, for example, the light depression, and you find that yes, it sort of comes and it seems to be like a biologically driven system, but how deeply you get depressed is also dependent on psychological factors, like whether your memory is overgeneral, for example, which is a lot of our research was showing that when you get depressed, you get more depression if your memory tends to be rather overgeneral. So what if I said, oh, can you remember a time when you're happy, a specific time, a specific day, most people come up with, oh, I remember the day that I met so-and-so, or the day when this sort of happened. But people often who are prone to depression or have had trauma in their life often will say things like, oh, you know, when I go on holiday. And you say, oh, can you think of a particular time? Oh, every time. Yeah, can you think of a particular holiday, a particular day? Oh, yes, I used to enjoy going on holiday with my parents. And do you notice what's happening? It's sort of all very general. It's almost like the depression or the trauma has created this sense of staying with the very general, not wanting to go into specifics. But we do know that people who are more specific actually are better problem solvers and get out of a depression more quickly. And that's true of seasonal affective disorder as well as other more non-seasonal depressions. So even if it's driven by biology, as is an important component of it, it seems like there are psychological factors which also affect outcomes. But so far, we haven't noticed that any particular pattern of depression makes this less effective. What we do notice is it's more effective if people have more episodes of depression, and if their first few episodes were related to trauma and abuse as childhood, or something going wrong, or difficulty with the parents, something turbulent happening in the teenage years, or child and teenage years, then often that triggers depression, which then it becomes recurrent. And they're the people who do best, actually, from mindfulness. And so they're the people you might think would do worse because they've got the longest history, the most difficult history, but actually they do pretty well. Yeah. So, but research is still ongoing. I mean, I think it's a very important subject to see if there are constellations that don't respond. Yeah. Yeah, carry on.
Sorry, I just have one follow-on question. So I'm just wondering, you mentioned that their memory, the kind of generalization of memory versus remembering specific events had a part to play. But would you say then that they were more mindful in the past when they were able to remember specific events? For example, if I'm more mindful right now, I might remember more details of your talk than if I'm mind wandering, I won't remember as much.
Yeah.
So then do you think that there's a neurological correlate, or that they were practicing mindfulness perhaps without being aware of it back then, so they're more likely to be able to meditate now? I'm just wondering your thoughts on that.
It's very difficult to know. I mean, we do know that all children go through a stage in which they're overgeneral. You know, before the age of 3 or 4, most children, if you ask them, you know, what did you do at kindergarten today? They say, oh, on Tuesdays we play, or on Tuesdays we have orange juice. You say, yes, what did you do today? On Tuesdays we have orange juice. It's very frustrating to ask children what they did at school. They tend not to give you very much information, as if they're hiding something, or have been told not to tell their parents when they come home, which isn't true. So all children go through this overgeneral stage, and one notion that people have is that some people don't actually get to elaborate and be more concrete in their memory, more specific in their memory, or that when people get stressed later on or have traumas later on, it reverts to their overgeneral strategy as a defense mechanism. So we know that people who ruminate more have more overgeneral memories. People who tend to be avoidant of their lives in general have more overgeneral memories, and people with lack of executive capacity for various reasons have more difficulties with their memories, if you measure it with working memory tasks and capacity tasks. So these things come together to make memory less specific, and when it's less specific, it seems to predict a longer depression. Yeah, to what extent that's a biological influence, a genetic influence, or a life history influence is difficult to detect, I think.
We do have a question. You did mention something about the seasonal affective disorder, or just seasonal depression in general. Someone was wondering if you have any tips, especially with, at least in our time zone here, we have the time change happening and it's getting darker and colder. Do you have any kind of tips for people who are struggling with seasonal affective disorder?
I'm not an expert on seasonal affective disorder, so I would Google it. I was talking to an Uber driver who's taking me to a place in Toronto last week, and he'd come from Somalia. He'd taken him, he'd been in Toronto 4 or 5 years, and he'd only just got his family out, and they'd settled in Toronto from last autumn, the late autumn, and his 5-6-year-old son, who'd used to in Somalia every day being 12 hours, 12 hours, 12 hours sunshine, daylight, 12 hours nighttime, and then came to Toronto as the nights were getting longer and the days were getting shorter. And his son said to him, "Why is the night crushing the day, Daddy?" And I thought, oh, but what a fantastically poetic way to ask the question, the night crushing the day. So what do we do when the night crushes the day? I would Google it because you get much better information. Can mindfulness help? Well, you know, I would say that, wouldn't I? That probably it can, because if there are going to be dark thoughts and dark moods, then one can use the summertime to learn the mindfulness, to protect yourself, because that's the analogy we use. Like when people are well, there's something you can do. You practice on thoughts like emails and stuff like that, so that when the dark thoughts come, there's just more chance of standing back from them and not taking them so seriously, so personally. So one thing that is really hard when when the darkness falls in your life as well as outside is that it can become harder to do some things you enjoy. So this idea of actually finding something that can be done to sustain you in the wintertime and making a deliberate strategy to do that. What do I appreciate? How have I coped and navigated myself through past winters? Who have I gone to? Which friends have helped me most? Scheduling it in, making an active plan before it really, before the night has really crushed the day, making an active plan, and then seeing if it's possible to notice what happens, to have a sort of antidepressant kit under the bed or something, say something you can take out when you're feeling bad. And in it will be a favorite novel that you like reading, a text maybe that you find inspiring, a few phone numbers of people you can ring, and that's your sort of safety kit for when things get dark. And in there somewhere, there'll be little comments. I mean, like John Kabat-Zinn's comment that he made right at the beginning of his insight into mindfulness. If you're still breathing, there's more right with you than wrong with you. If you're still breathing, there's more right with you than wrong with you. That might be something to put in the box. And so making a strategy, I think, is generally quite useful rather than just waiting till it happens when it's too late for strategies. So I would encourage you to do that. And then perhaps if you want to do what we do, just follow. There's plenty of downloads and all our meditations are in the book, downloadable with a QR code and so on, so that people can then do it for themselves and find their ground, notice these thoughts coming up without having to see them and get so close to them you get entangled in them. Yeah, thanks, Lisa.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. Moving on to the next question. So does your book, The Feeling Tone, go more in depth of what you discussed today, or do you recommend one of your other books for those of you curious here today to learn more about what you have talked today?
So everything I've talked about today is part of this book that we've just done called Deepen Mindfulness. And it contains an 8-week feeling tone course. Starting with finding your ground, which is what we did to start with, and then going through how to relate to the mind when it wanders, and seeing in the gym membership analogy, just seeing the mind as trying to help you, and then going into the feeling tone course itself, just noticing these moments, these tipping point moments, then learning how to say it's okay not to like this, it's okay to like this, and then there's no action needed. So each one of the things that we've touched on today will have a week of its own and its own practices. And the practices are, there's a 10-minute version, 20-minute version, and a 30-minute version, so it can suit people's lives. Some of them are even shorter than 10 minutes, but generally there's a 10-minute, 20-minute, and 30-minute version, so that people can do what they can, rather than have to sit for a very long time if it's very distracted or they're very bothered. And we do so that at any time, if things get overwhelming, just stop for a while. Don't grit your teeth and try and meditate through something that's overwhelming. Just take a break and then come back to it when you feel ready for it.
Perfect. Thank you. That was helpful. Another question we have, is there a relationship between joylessness and feeling tones? So as in, can any exhaustion or depression distort feeling tones?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the nature of this idea of focusing on one thing, damping down other things, is the feeling tone of those other things changes until, if they hit rock bottom, then that's enough hit rock bottom, that's joylessness. But there's something else that goes on as well. That's a sort of automatic thing. When you're focusing on one thing, it damps down others. But dampening can be quite sort of a deliberate strategy in some people, because all of us hate to be disappointed, and we hate to see other people disappointed. And so what we now know is that when you feel happy and enthused and excited about things, very often it doesn't take long before you yourself actually start to dampen the thing. You think it's good for you to dampen, or maybe your mum or dad at one point said to you, oh, don't get your hopes up. I think I'll apply to Oxford. Oh, very good, very good. But there are other universities as well, Don't get your hopes up. Or as my mum used to say sometimes when we got excited, there'll be tears by bedtime. And she wasn't often wrong. But, you know, and why do we do this to our children? Because we love them so much. It's to protect them, because we hate to see them disappointed. So if we see a child excited, you know, we love to see them excited, but often a sort of shadow creeps over, which is, oh, I hope they don't be disappointed. I've been picked for the team. I've been picked for the team. Oh no, oh, what will go wrong? You know, so we sort of try, in our best parental way, we try to protect our kids, right? But we take this in, even if we've got a parent that never said that to us, we do it anyway. So we can't blame them all the time. And so there's a sense of wanting to get our disappointment in first. And somebody, guess what's got a questionnaire that somebody called Feldman and Yorman and Sherry Goodman, I think, anyway, has got a questionnaire, dampening questionnaire, which asks, when you get excited, enthused, and happy, what do you say to yourself? And it's things like, I say these feelings won't last. I say that my luck might change. I say that people might think I'm bragging. I mean, this sort of stuff. So it's like, and they found, surprise, surprise, that when people say yes, yes, yes to all of these things, and then get depressed, the depression goes deeper and lasts longer. So that's a sort of dampening that all of us can begin to recognize and begin to just pause. When we feel like saying something like that, we might want to say to ourselves, no action needed right now. And just let the excitement and enthusiasm of the moment be there without having to sort of manage it and regulate it in some way. Yeah.
Perfect, great. Thank you for all of the examples. Next question we have is, how effective are your meditation and mindfulness techniques for people who are on medication for depression, anxiety, or just any other condition?
Interestingly, they can go alongside medication quite well. And indeed, if you're unsure and the doctor's put you on a medication, then it's good to stay on the medication. Now, if you want to come off it, you have to be very, very careful and work with your GP, with your family practitioner, so they know exactly how to come off. But if you need to stay on, that's also fine. They've done some trials in which they've compared some people randomly allocated to continue their medication, antidepressant medication, or people who do mindfulness then gradually come off their medication. And they find that doing mindfulness and coming off your medication is as effective as staying on the medication. There are 2 or 3 trials that show that. But it's not necessary to come up. I mean, that's useful to know, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody should now come off their medication and do mindfulness instead. Because coming off the medication can be quite activating. It can be quite turbulent. So it's quite a challenge to do that. But at least we know that mindfulness is an alternative for people who say want to and don't want their medication and really, really want to come off. That if you have a good mindfulness-based cognitive therapy class or therapist to go to, then we know it can hold you. And not so much work has been done specifically on MBCT and coming off, I think, anti-anxiolytic drugs, but most drugs for anxiety now, they tend to use the same as depression drugs as well, since they seem to have a common processes, and many of these deal with different neurotransmitter systems in the same pill. So I would expect it would be a similar sort of outcome. But I do advise people to consult their physician before they do this, because that's if they've got a good physician, it's a wonderful thing to have. A person to have, I should say, not a thing.
Great, thank you. Yeah, good to know there's different options that people can kind of use together. Next up, does mindfulness help prevent dementia or help control any of its symptoms?
Well, there aren't many studies. So, and you can see press reports of studies that claim that mindfulness is good at least preventing a normal aging process, in that but whether they will stand up to replication, we don't know. So Sarah Lazar has done in the Harvard General Hospital, has done some really interesting work looking at the brains of people who've practiced a lot versus people that haven't practiced. But you never quite know whether the people who've practiced had different brains to begin with. And so you need a randomized controlled trial, and those are being done. And they're sort of promising, but they're not trials on trying to halt the process of dementia, as far as I know, Where mindfulness does seem to play a role is in dealing with the non-cognitive consequences of having such a challenge in the family and in yourself as dementia, because it can come with an extraordinary amount of burden of worry and distress, and both for the person themselves and in the family. And that itself can take you down and produce indeed impairments. So that I remember many years ago, I had a student who did a little bit of research on people that had come off their motorbikes and had a bit of brain damage that was affecting their memory. And one thing that they noticed there was they're mostly amnesic for the accident itself, and but they spent a great deal of time trying to remember what had happened to them. Other people had told them, but they couldn't remember. And so he measured how much time they were sort of spending ruminating about it, as well as the impairment as measured by standard cognitive tests. And it looked to him at that time, his name is Hugh Williams, that actually about half of the impairment was due to the impairment to wrapping up all your cognitive resources in ruminating and brooding, and half was due to the accident itself. Now, whether that can be replicated, I don't know, but you experts here, you're the experts on that. We do know that if, from my side, emotional problems, that it wraps up a lot of cognitive resources when you're emotionally distressed. As we've said, it becomes all-consuming. And when something is that all-consuming, it's really difficult to think straight. So just at the time when you need all the resources you've got in the self and in the family, the understandable distress can take you down. And as I understand it from reading about your work here, this is one of the places in the world that really understands that really understands that through exercise, mindfulness, meditation, OT, physiotherapy, and so on, people who come here have the best chance of being able to deal with their distress and any cognitive issues, cognitive decline. So, gosh, I wish this place could be replicated all over the world.
Great, that's awesome. Perfect, thank you. Next question we have, are there any studies that you know or you're involved in with addiction and mindfulness?
I don't do work on addiction myself, but there's a chap in Brown University called Judson Brewer, and he does do work on addiction. That's what his main theme is. And he produces apps for people who want to relieve themselves of addiction. He looks at all sorts of addiction. So, and he's got many books. I think there's one called The Craving Mind. So if people want to know about addiction, then that's one place to go. There's also something called Sarah Bowen, who's done formal work on mindfulness-based, what she calls mindfulness-based relapse prevention for people who are getting over a major addiction to drugs or alcohol. And that seems to have beneficial effects. But the person I would go to now, in fact, I'm going to see him next week, is a guy called Judd Brewer in Brown University Mindfulness Center there. And he's got books and apps and a great website, and that's where I'd start.
Perfect, great, thank you. Next up, for those with insomnia, should they be using meditation practices during the night or during the day? And I guess for those without, is there any specific time that you recommend for certain meditation throughout the day?
Right, okay. Well, it's interesting that meditation seems to be useful for insomnia. So there are some studies of that. And for that reason, we've put a little meditation for when you can't sleep in the new book in week 4 as a sort of bonus meditation. And that meditation is basically the beginning of a body scan. So you notice what thoughts are going through your mind. You allow them to express themselves in terms of, this is unpleasant or this is pleasant. And to say to yourself, it's okay not to like this. That's part of the course that we teach. But then to ask people to put their attention in their feet and see if it'll stay there. Now that is quite difficult when you're in bed, because when your mind starts racing again, and all you do as soon as your mind starts, you put your attention back in the feet. And then the mind starts up and you put your attention back in the feet. If you want to, you can actually expand from the feet to the legs and so on and do a whole body scan in which you're scanning the whole body, but the feet will do pretty well because there's a simplicity about that, which my experience is when I can't sleep, if I put my attention on feet for more than a few seconds or minutes, my mind wanders off into a dreamlike state. And I wake up about 40, 50 minutes later, realizing I've been asleep. And I think, oh, where were my feet? And I put my attention on the feet again, and off you go again. And so there's a sense of focusing the attention, but allowing yourself to realize that at that moment, sleeplessness, when you want to sleep, is itself unpleasant. So it has an unpleasant feeling to it. So you might want to say to yourself, I can't sleep. This is unpleasant. It's okay not to like it. It's okay not to like it. That can sort of, okay, right. I'm not liking it, and that's okay. Now let's do a meditation. Now, it's quite useful to have done a bit of practice during the day on that meditation so that you don't have to switch my voice on. Because if you have to fumble around trying to find your iPhone, it's going to sort of wake you up, isn't it, with a glow. And also, as soon as you get into the rabbit warren of your iPhone, you were looking for my meditation, but no. So you've seen somebody sent you an email, and somebody sent you an Instagram, and somebody sent you a Be Real thing from across the world, and before long, you'll have forgotten you were trying to get to sleep. Yeah. So practicing during the day means you're familiar with it, and then in the middle of the night, you can just do it yourself and guide yourself through the meditation. So I think a bit of meditation during the day, but there are specific things you can do at night. But it starts with admitting you're awake and that maybe you're not liking it, saying it's okay not to like it. I'm awake and I don't want to be awake. I don't like it. It's okay not to like it. And then maybe put your attention in your feet, do a body scan and see what happens. And at least if you stay awake, you'll be rested, because so you're rested by doing the meditation, and that itself can help sort of renew. And because when you can't sleep, very often the thoughts are, I need to sleep because I'll be no good tomorrow if I don't sleep. And then you become obsessed with sleeping in order to be good function the next day. Actually, people function pretty well after a sleepless night the next day. It doesn't take their function down. But during the next day, people start to say to themselves, I'd better sleep tonight, though. I'd better sleep tonight. So they get obsessed with it. And when they get to say, right, am I going to sleep? Am I going to sleep? And you know that telling yourself to go to sleep actually doesn't work. So having these other ways of allowing yourself to focus on one thing, to rest, to bring rest and calm, whether you go to sleep or not, can be really helpful.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, Diana.
I'll just jump in and ask a question of my own. So what would you recommend for creating a productive work schedule in your day, just in terms of for me, I definitely get overwhelmed with the amount of tasks that kind of come as I'm working, and I try and prioritize, but it's then another one comes in, and then my mind just goes to, oh yes, and that and this, and I have lists, but there are lists everywhere. So yeah.
Do you have a master list of your lists?
I do.
Yeah,
And then I make
absolutely.
another master list of the master list.
I know that feeling. I know that feeling. Indeed. When I first became a psychologist, my senior psychologist who was supervising me had a list, and she had chronic and acute. And the chronic things were things that she, would have to get to eventually, and the acute were things that have to, be done the next day or two. And but she used to, she cross things out and then add another list, make another list of a list and so on. I think admitting that it's hard is one thing. It's hard to schedule and prioritize these things. So knowing that it's difficult, and therefore letting yourself off that secondary hook of saying, I should be able to do this. What's wrong with me? I should be, because often I should be able to do this. It's just taking up space, in a mind that would prefer to actually be focused. So doing what you're doing in terms of scheduling, and then seeing if it's possible, and it's not always possible, to switch off notifications for a certain period of time, say for 45 minutes or an hour, so that you can just focus on this and be out for everything else that would distract you. Or put a thing on your email thing saying, I check my emails once an hour, so thank you for your patience, or something like that. So that you've dealt with it by people having an email reply or people getting to know. And then if it's possible to turn the notifications off for a certain length of time. I was once sharing a stage with a guy who invented called LinkedIn. I'm not on it myself, but anyway, he invented this thing and it's gone all over the world apparently. I keep getting asked if I want to join it, but I don't know what I'm joining. Is anybody here on LinkedIn? Oh, right, there we are. Oh, it's obviously a thing then. Anyway, this guy invented it. And he explained that he has 2 computers at home, one to work on and one to do all the emails and all that sort of stuff. And that was exactly for that, because he didn't want the same machine to be the machine that would do and the machine that he actually worked on. And I thought that was really interesting for a tech savvy person to actually manipulate his tech to serve him rather than so he would be the servant of the tech. So if we can find ways in which the tech can serve us instead of we being their servants, however that would be for you, knowing your own day, that might be quite useful. It might mean you have to ask somebody on your grant to get you another computer. And how productive you would be with another computer.
Thank you so much.
Perfect, great. Just kind of, we only have about 7 more minutes left. So just final question. We have a dietitian on Zoom right now. There's a question. As dietitians, they recommend mindful eating and eating with others as part of their healthy eating. And when they think about meditation or mindfulness, what they often think more of is what we practice today with you, sitting in a quiet space and just, yourself and your own thoughts. What do you think in terms of mindfulness and socializing, in terms of just while eating or in general?
Okay, that's a really, really good question. So if you think about mindful socializing, there are various things that it's really good to do, like practicing listening, for example. Again, no action needed right now is quite good, where whichever relationship you're in with partners, with friends, when you want to give advice to somebody and you think, oh, do they really need what might I think of this situation? Just no action needed right now, and go back into listening mode, receiving instead of transmitting. And that is really helpful, especially if you've got social anxiety. Just asking questions of people and listening, really good. You don't have to speak because people love to talk. So just asking questions and is really helpful. So mindfulness of those processes can be very helpful. And mindful eating is, it's a big challenge. One of the things that we sometimes say is that, in fact, mindfulness courses often start with eating practice, the raisin practice, tasting one raisin, for example, and taking time. We also add to that a chocolate meditation in which you unwrap a piece of chocolate and smell it and taste it. And if you take that into your mouth and eventually chew it, then spending about a minute afterwards with the aftertaste is really intriguing. I do advise people to do this. One piece of chocolate, put it in the mouth. When it's gone, instead of taking another one, just notice what happens in the minute after it's been swallowed. What you may notice is that there's a sort of nothing happens, and then a blast of taste, which is an aftertaste, which is as strong or possibly even stronger than the taste and can make you salivate quite strongly. And then that gradually goes. So if you eat too quickly, what happens is you miss the savoring of the meal because you're onto the next bite before you've finished this one. And I mean, we all know, do they have Rolos here? Like these little caramel sweets in the tube? Okay, so now, how many Rolos do you actually taste when you have a tube of Rolos? I mean, you taste probably the first one, yeah? You probably taste the last with a twinge of regret because it's now your last Rolo. But those ones in between, where did they go? Where did they go? So you've just paid all that money for 2 Rolos. And there were 12 or 13, I don't know, actually, I've never counted because I know the first and the last, but not the ones in between. So actually, you could get your money's worth really by taking one and then not taking the next one straight away, just leaving that refractory period where you actually get a double Rolo effect. And then at the end of that, you come back to baseline again, and then you can make a choice about whether it's the next one, because in that period immediately after you've eaten, there's a sense of, oh, wanting the next one, wanting the next one. But when you eat in order to satisfy that urge, it's not really eating. It's not really eating it. It's not like the first one. So, but I think your dietitian, I think will probably be giving this advice anyway, but that's the mindful approach to eating.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for answering all the questions. For those of you here in person today, we do have just a few more minutes if you do want to go talk to him after for any additional questions. But for those of you on Zoom, thank you so much for joining today. And we'll hope to see you for our next month's research seminar series. It will be the first Wednesday of the month, and it will be on Zoom. So thank you again for joining, and thank you, Dr. Williams, for today's talk.
Thank you. Thank you.